Okay. Manchakalpatarubhisthakipisindhuvayevichapatitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Om Megyantamrandasya Janana Sakavaya Chakchum Militam Yena Tasmi Sri. I caught the last part of the introduction for the newsletter. I was really impressed with how together and organized that person was. So my introduction to deity worship began in a little haphazard way in San Francisco, which was when I located some colorful small wooden icons, figures, which turned out to be Lord Jagannath. And at that point in time, it's fair to say that we had no clue about deities at all. This was in very early, end of February of 67. So upon seeing the small figure, the first figure was only Jagannath that we had. And although I had found them, contrary to modern folklore, I didn't bring them to Prabhupada. I didn't bring him. It was Mukunda and Shamsundar brought him to Prabhupada to find out what this little thing was that had been standing in our apartment on a shelf. And to their astonishment, Srila Prabhupada, at that time we were still Swamiji, he made obeisances. And it's fair to say he was surprised to see this little figurine, but he was also happy. And he asked where did they find them and where did they find this little figure? And they looked at each other and they just said, well, Malati found them. And he said, call her. So I was called up to the room and he asked me if there was others. He said, this is Lord Jagannath. Jagannath means Lord of the universe. So then, were there others? Lord of the universe means Krishna. It's not different from Krishna. So were there others? So I said, yes. But I was thinking numerically because they had been in a large display barrel, 3 display barrels. So each one had quite a lot of these little figurines. So I was saying, yes, lots. But Prabhupada was very sober. And he said, no, 2 others different. So I remembered, there was the yellow-faced smiling one and the white-faced smiling one, and in front, the one that was already there, the black-faced smiling one. So yes. So he said, bring them. And then he gave a brief introduction. He said that this is Lord Jagannath. The other 2 are his brothers and sisters. Lord Jagannath is Krishna. And of course, I mean, I have a whole dissertation, practically speaking, on Jagannath Krishna. But we still didn't have any idea what was going to happen. He just said to Shamsundar, can you carve large size? And Shamsundar immediately agreed. And once they were finished, they were installed. But as per the installations that we know of today, it was quite a different story. He had told Shamsundar to make a raised platform. He actually didn't even use the word altar. He just said make a raised platform, and he said it should have a canopy, a covering. So that was accomplished. But the thing was, because he said raised, he didn't actually say how raised, and Shamsundar took it very literally And because there was a very tall ceiling, it was quite raised to the point to get up to that platform, you had to get on a ladder. But on the day of the installation, all three of them were on the platform, and there was as per instructions, a canopy. In fact, he said the canopy should be blue with gold fringe. So Shamsundar made a metal frame, and Jamuna had made the canopy. And then Shamsundar added another touch, because in addition, Prabhupada said there should be some lights. And Shamsundar put a little device between the socket and the light bulb that caused the lights to go on and off, like blinking. And Prabhupada seemed quite pleased with that, actually. So the installation ceremony was a very abbreviated affair. We didn't have any arti equipment whatsoever. We didn't know the word arti. We didn't know what a ghee lamp was. We didn't have one. We had a tray with candles and incense. Everything in those days, we used a lot of incense. So not only would, we didn't have a pujari, so everybody was like in the room was waving incense, which meant the room was quite cloudy. And then this tray with the candles on it was passed around, and the whole entire time the Hare Krishna Mahamantra was being chanted. So the incense and then the tray with the candles, everybody would wave them, to use Prabhupada's words, in front of the deities. And you might find it interesting that they were not dressed beyond the painted outfits that they come with. So that first year, they were on the altar, their first Rath Yatra, just in wearing the painted outfits. So that was 67. So the following year for the Rath Yatra was when they first started to wear the sewn outfits. Prabhupada brought some silk from India, red silk, and he's brought that. He gave it to Jamuna. So Jamuna and Harshrani made the first outfits. And so in that second year in 68, we started dressing the deities. And I'd have to say it was just occasionally, because one outfit, so then they had to make another outfit. So it wasn't like a whole daily type of dressing the deities was going on initially. On that on the installation day, after it was over, he said, well, now you have to offer everything that you cook to them. And he instructed me to get a plate that nobody else had eaten from, because hippies were famous recyclers. And he knew he would probably go to a secondhand store and get something or pick something off the street, because that was kind of how we were in those days, recycling like that. So I managed. He gave a specific instruction that there should be a plate, so preferably a silver or silver plated. So we had silver plated plate, a goblet, 2 bowls, and a spoon. So that was what I was instructed to get. I got it. And as far as the offering procedure, before the deities came, our offering was pretty simple. We just brought all the pots and put them in the middle of the room, and everybody bowed down. Somebody rang a bell, and we chanted Hare Krishna. Not a particular set number of times. We just chanted until we felt like, okay, it's enough. And so now the deities were there. Was the beginning of a semblance of formal offering. And so instead of the pots coming in, the plates came in and were put on the altar. And curtains were closed. We were instructed to have curtains. So the curtains were closed. He said that we should close them when they ate. And just the Pranam mantra, Srila Prabhupada, Namo Vishnu Padaya, Then we did the Namo Brahmanaya Devaya, Namo Mahavadandaya Prabhupada. So it was just very simple, 3 times each one, ringing the bell. Then when Srila Prabhupada's second pranam mantra was given by Srila Prabhupada, that was added to it. But there was, even up at that time, we didn't even have an Achman. I mean, it was bare bones simple. So that is the beginning. Nobody was Brahmin. The Brahmin initiations came the following year when we went to, on our way to London, actually. Stopped in Montreal to have fun, a darshan of Srila Prabhupada before departure. And it was during that visit, which was in 68, that we got the Gayatri mantra. And it was around the time it was, we spent Prabhupada's Janmashtami and Prabhupada's appearance day with Prabhupada. So it was during that same period that we were given Gayatri mantra. But we still didn't understand basically what it was for, why we were getting it, because within a couple of days we were leaving. So then in London, probably most people know that story about how London Ishwara was procured by the desire of Srila Prabhupada. But London Ishwara was the first large deities installed, not only large deities, but large Radha Krishna deities that were installed. And that was pretty dramatic because on several fronts. But it was still simple, but but by this point we understood the deities had to have clothes, they had clothes, and there was a very simple ceremony using a ladle from the kitchen to pour the substances, which were basically water, milk, and I think yogurt. And the main activity was chanting the Hare Krishna Mahamantra. So I have to say, for the early days people, this Hare Krishna Mahamantra was really cemented into our minds, into our heads, into our hearts as being the primary mantra, the primary benediction, as Lord Chaitanya would say. We didn't have other mantras. But with London Ishwara, he started giving little more details, more than he did with Jagannath, because with Jagannath, he actually didn't give any immediate details. It just would wake him up in the morning and then go through the day. Whatever was offered, and then at night it would be kirtan, and they'd close the curtain, he'd take rest. But with London Ishwara, we started having set arti times. We learned about arti. By that time, we had learned about arti. And so there were the artis were being observed. And the famous instruction for punctuality and cleanliness was strongly provoked into our consciousness during that time. And an unfortunate incident occurred during the time that there was an attack on the deities. And there was some breakage of Radharani's hand in particular. So in order to effect the repair, which was interesting, was that we brought a person from Scotland who was a expert on repairing marble statues. So this person was obviously not a devotee, and he probably broke most of the regulated principles. But that wasn't an issue for Prabhupada. The issue was he competent? Could he do it? Could he make the repair? Which he was able to do. So then on our end, was the repainting. And at that point, Prabhupada became very particular. And he was very concerned that there should be no change in their appearance. And so that was interesting because we hadn't really had that concept, changing appearance. Now it's like horrible. It goes on all over the movement. Like year to year, you don't know if the deity is going to look the same. But he was very particular about that. And second thing was, we saw the hand and everything was okay as far as the repair, but when the hand was repainted, he wanted it redder. He said, redder. Red. First he just used reddish, but when he saw it, he said redder, and he wanted with not a blank red because he wanted the lines to show, but reddish with the lines. So that was another instruction given in London, but not limited to London. So he also instructed, there was another sweet instruction that Radharani should wear a choker. So that became quite a standard throughout ISKCON at that time. In many of the older temples, we follow that standard still. I know in New Vrindavan, that is a standard that is followed, that Radharani always has her choker on. And if you don't know what I mean by choker, it means a small, like a small neck, encircles the neck. So not, on the chest, but on the neck itself. And it was during our time in London, previous to the installation, that Jamuna was trained up personally by Srila Prabhupada how to worship the Archa Vigraha, the deity. And he did that by using his own small Radha Krishna deities. And that occurred quite extensively throughout our time in John Lennon's estate, the Tittenhurst estate. He was showing her how to worship, how to perform the arti. But it was very simple. There were no mudras and extra mantras. The only mantra really was the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra, and later on Govindam, and the Govindam prayer. And then I'm just speaking right now of deities that I've had some personal interaction with during Prabhupada's time. So the next, after London Ishwara, there was Radha Kalachandji from Dallas, Radha Kunja Bihari from Detroit, and Kishore Chora Gopinath from Toronto. That was in the 70s. And then Chicago, Kishore Kishori. So it was interesting with Kishore Kishori because, well, first of all, I was already in Jaipur with Srimati Devi Dasi. And the three deities I just mentioned, Kalachandji, Kunja Bihari, and Kishore Chora Gopinath, had been purchased, along with a small Chota Kalachandji, white marble Radharani and black marble Krishna, but small size. And where was I going here? Oh yeah, so we finished packing them up for being exported, and we were going to take the train back down to Bombay at the time, and literally speaking, as we were leaving the place we were staying, which was the home of the Murtiwala, a telegram arrived in my name, and it was from Prabhupada, and he just said, "Bring deities large size, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami." So it was decided that Srimati would go ahead and return. She had some other assignment. I would stay and try to get large deities, which at that time meant 39 or 41 or 42-inch size Krishna. And, it's not actually that you just walk in and there's a set of deities that are, perfect for you. Usually it's a little endeavor. But somehow or other, quickly found these very lovely deities. And I did the packing, which had been told to me by Srila Prabhupada actually to be very careful about, like, their wrists, their hands, the ankle areas. Yeah, I mean, now they pressurize this foam in. If anybody has recently purchased deities, they pack them in such a way you could probably drop them off a building and they wouldn't break, in the container. It's very good. But in those days, they didn't have bubble wrap. They didn't have this pressurized foam. So we would use newspapers and cloth and just wrap and wrap and wrap. So the deities were brought down to Bombay by myself. I know I didn't have a train reservation. So I rode with the lorry on an overnight drive from Jaipur down to Bombay. And when I arrived at Hare Krishna land, that was the Juhu project, we were living in tents at the time. It wasn't developed. And Prabhupada was in town for a second Pandal program. So he was staying in Bombay. And so he found out I had arrived, and he sent a message that I should come with the deities to where he was staying. So when we arrived there, they were brought upstairs where he was staying. Very, very large, spacious flat. It was a very it's a conclave where wealthy people lived. So this was like a very spacious place. It was furnished. It had a servant's quarters. So the deity was brought up and put in the front room. And from the front room to Prabhupada's room, there was a door. And he walked through the door. He saw the deities immediately. He made obeisances and indicated they should be brought to his room and placed in front of his desk. So again, this time he made pranams, and he said to me, "Hold out your hand." So I held out my hand, and he took a ring off of his finger and dropped it into my hand, and said, "See if it fits." So it fit my middle finger. And that was his way of thanking me and expressing his appreciation of these deities. So the interesting thing about Kishore Kishori, of course, is that most deities are Radha, like Radha Kalachandri, Radha Gopinath, Radha Kunja Vihari. But Kishore Kishori, like, Krishna's name is first instead of Radha's name. And when asked about that, Prabhupada smiled and said, "Saved the best for last." In other words, Kishori was the best. So that was a sweet exchange. And then a little later after that, I had a message from the person who at the time was the GVC for Germany, and that was Hansaduta Prabhu. And he requested that I take a couple of his brahmacharis with me and go to Jaipur. And he wanted me to get, he wanted large deities. He wanted the largest deities in ISKCON. A little competitive there. That probably wasn't the best mindset. I mean, but anyway, we went, and 6-foot white Radha and Krishna, extremely beautiful. But because they were so big, I thought, I should get a smaller set also, Utsava deities. So a smaller Radha and Krishna, but black and white. No, white, can't even remember. But those deities didn't stay long. Everything fell apart. And the large deities went to, are now in California, actually. But the smaller deities are the ones that at first they were with the Nrsimha Kshetra, and then I think the name of the project is Abin Tower. And those small Madan Gopal deities, those were the small ones that had been brought at that time. Then I was in Amsterdam, and I was doing traveling Sankirtan, ladies' party. And at that time, the only deities in Amsterdam were Jagannath Swami, Subhadra, and Baladev. And one day, the girls and myself, we had this idea that there should be Radha and Krishna also at our temple. So we went back on the weekend, and we convinced the temple president to allow us to go out the following week and just collect to get Radha Krishna deities for Amsterdam. So I don't know, we were pretty covered over because we didn't even think to ask our GBC. And that was already bad enough, but worse than that, we didn't even think to ask Srila Prabhupada for his blessings and permission. We just did, we did it, you know. So I went to India, and beautiful deities of Radha and Krishna. And then I saw these two exquisite smaller deities, Lalita and Vishaka. So not only did we get Radha and Krishna, then Lalita Vishaka also came. And then I convinced the temple president that I should go to Italy to get marble for an altar, to have an altar made. And I made a design. He agreed. I took the train and went to Italy. And a devotee took me to the marble quarry, and we met a person who agreed to make the altar. And on my way back, I stopped at Paris. The train stopped there, and I got off. And I had my first darshan of Radha Parasiswara. So it so happened that the GBC, who for Holland and France was Bhagavan, and he happened to be there. So he was surprised to see me, and he was even more surprised when he found out what was going on. But his response was, "Oh, good, now we'll have more deities in Hamsaduta in Germany." So sometimes in the earlier days, our competitive spirit even spilled over into the deities. Deity worship. But now, of course, I think you all know where Radha Gopinath and Lalita Vishaka are in Radha Desh. And but an upshot of that was a letter from Prabhupada to Bhagavan, which I did not see until after Prabhupada's departure. So in that letter, he chastised Bhagavan that we had gotten these deities, and we hadn't gotten his blessings, like we were totally covered over. So he's chastising Bhagavan, who actually didn't know either initially. But in that letter he wrote, and Malati should know better. So when I saw that, it was like, a thud into a kick in the stomach, because I realized that, what a great offense it actually had been to do such a thing without his blessings or permission, and both required. And I realized how much he depended on the elder devotees to keep his instructions intact. So from that moment, I've been very concerned about following Prabhupada's standards, even if simple, and trying to, as much as possible, keep his instructions intact. In Bhakti Vedanta manner, the small Gaur-Nitai and the small Radha Krishna deities were brought by myself. Shamsundar purchased a small Gaur-Nitai. And so Prabhupada knew about that I had brought them. He knew about that. So at a certain point, we were at the manor, things were so austere. Like in the beginning days, I don't know if anybody's who's on this call and if anybody was there at that time, but you can attest that there we were in this palatial building and we didn't, we were eating like oats and carrots, literally. I mean, it was like we'd go to town and whatever we could find after the vegetable market closed, we'd get that. And the morale of the devotees was kind of, it was exciting at first. We're going to live in this palace, but then it was quite difficult. So I felt like, the deities were there in the trunk upstairs. So perhaps, if they came, that would give us a focus. And I consulted with Nandana Swami at the time, and it was agreed that the deities would be installed. And Prabhupada was informed. That's so we got that part covered. And when he finally came to the manor, and he was brought in to see the deities, which were not at that time in the main room, which is now the temple room. They were in the little theater room that was the theater room to the right when you walk in the side door. So he came in for their darshan, and he was, hands were folded, and he was looking, and he goes, Lord Chaitanya, because they had kind of longish hair, it was almost to their waist. He goes, Lord Chaitanya was not a hippie. His hair should be, and he, indicated shoulder length with his hand. He was indicating shoulder length. And then he looked and he said, Lord Chaitanya must wear a peacock feather. Nityananda can, but he doesn't have to. So I'm hearing that. And as soon as Prabhupada turned and walked out, I got a pair of scissors and they gave him the haircut on the spot. And had a peacock feather bang that went right into Lord Chaitanya's. In those days when Prabhupada said to do something, it's not like, okay, I'll put this on my bucket list. We didn't even use that term anyway, but, it was done. I was just reading something from Prabhupada yesterday or the day before, and he was mentioning how, like when there's love, anything can happen. And, he said, just like these, boys and girls, they were so affectionate. And they love me. As soon as there is anything I desire, it is done. And of course, it was because of love. And we didn't, we didn't say, okay, well, okay, I heard you, I'll do it later. It was done. So the small Radha Krishna at the manor, I also had brought. Originally, Krishna was black marble. And Radha was, of course, as she is, the same. But the black marble Krishna apparently was broken, and they felt that it was likely if it could happen again. So they replaced with a metal deity. But when London Ishwara were installed, it was, when Radha Gokulananda, the manor deities were installed. Prabhupada personally, again in London, he personally installed with the help of Jamuna. And here again, he did the installation. Again, it was, some more, we knew what artist equipment was. We had, the basics were kind of down by now. Had arti paraphernalia, camera, and peacock feathers fan. But still, for the actual installation was just using kitchen equipment. You see a picture, you'll see Prabhupada with a ladle, and it wasn't even a brand new ladle. It was just the kitchen ladle. But the most wonderful thing was that Srila Prabhupada offered the first arti to them. And I think there's a photo of that somewhere, Prabhupada offering that first arti. We had so many devotees in those days that we started doing 8 artis. And when Prabhupada came the second time, I was feeling a little proud about that. And I told him we were, having 8 artis, 8 offerings. And he wasn't really that impressed. His concern was, can it be maintained? That was his concern. Well, that wasn't the number of artis. It was, can it be maintained? So that was a constant theme. When he went to Russia with Shamsundar, he left me his small deities to take care of. And I asked, what was the schedule? And he goes, that you determine. Because, I had my daughter actually, who was staying in the situation. So I had my daughters, and he said, so in other words, determine the schedule, but maintain it. So that was always more important than a number of artis and offerings. It was a schedule that could be maintained. There has been a lot of changes I mentioned going on to deities. It's something that is, quite unattractive, actually. Changing the appearance of the deities was something that Prabhupada was concerned about. He expressed it the first time with London Ashwara. And in fact, he said there should be a book maintained, a deity book, like, we have a diary. So the deity's diary, I think there's a word for that, I can't remember. But, detailing the history of the deities and with photographs. And maybe other temples do it, but the only one I know for sure that has actually done that is in Chicago, that they have a book at least up to us, for quite a number of years, detailing incidents with the deities and showing pictures of them. But it's really important to have good close-ups of the deity's face from, 2 or 3 angles. So when the time comes to, if you have to repaint them or touch them up, that you don't change the appearance. But unfortunately, now there's a trend to intentionally change the appearance, changing the shape of the eyes, notably making them larger, changing the color of eyes, notably making them blue. So these are things that Srila Prabhupada definitely warned against, instructed against. There's a story in Dallas shortly after the installation of Kalachandji. So Kalachandji is a very large, beautiful black deity. Radharani is a white deity, marble. And we had sent conch shell eyes for Kalachandji, but somehow they were misplaced and were not installed. That they just used his painted eyes because they couldn't find the conch shell eyes. But shortly after the installation, Lakshmi Moni, who was the pujari for them at the time, found the eyes. And she went to Srila Prabhupada and she said, Prabhupada, I found the conch shell eyes. If you like, I can put them on. I can put them on Kalachandji. And Prabhupada just calmly said, Kalachandji's eyes are fine the way they are. And she goes, but Prabhupada, I found the conch shell eyes. I can put them on. And again, he just said, Kalachandji's eyes are fine the way they are. And somehow in her enthusiasm, but Prabhupada, I found the eyes. And at this point, he goes, I'm Prabhupada, and I'm telling you, Kalachandji's eyes are fine the way they are. So again, no change. Even if it might appear to have been something that he had wanted, the deities are now installed. This is how they've arrived. I remember one of the first grand affair deity installations in USA. I won't mention the temple, but the eyes of one of the deities were slightly slightly, ever so slightly, I think they were crossed, Anyway, it wasn't, really that big of a deal. That's how it came. But they decided to change the eyes, and they did change them, but it was like kind of a dramatic change. So this was, after the installation. And I remember thinking, if you had a baby and you looked at the eyes and you didn't like them, what would you do? Send them to a eye surgeon and here, change my baby's eyes. This is how it came. So something to be mindful of. If you're going to install deities, get it right. Actually, Prabhupada didn't even like changing the deity's appearance before installation. In New York, when Govinda came, so Govinda had been installed in Jaipur for a big program there in 1972, and then he came to New York. So they were going to have another installation, and I guess like a secondary installation, welcome to New York. But they had changed the eyes, they had changed the appearance, and Prabhupada was quite upset about it. To the point, I think he threatened not to, go ahead with the installation.
Does anyone have any questions they'd like to ask Malati about her experiences with Srila Prabhupada and with the deities? Because we had to cut it off because of Big Krishna Maharaj had a very strict time. So anyone would like to ask Malati any questions? We've got another 10 minutes left in the call. And I might say myself that Malati's presentation was just fantastic. I really just like to hear about the stories and just little details that Prabhupada had mentioned that maybe all of us weren't so aware of. They were really nice to hear. So does anyone have any questions at all?
If there's no questions, I would like to share, I think it's probably the first letter with some details about Radha Krishna deity worship, and it was written on February 12th in 1969 to Satsvarup, who was not a Swami at that time. But if you like, I can share that.
Please do. Please do.
So, yeah, he wrote this letter and there was some personal intro. Then he goes, regarding your idea of having an installation ceremony for the deities, it's a very good suggestion. And you may also have the sacrificial fire. The deity should be bathed with milk, and while bathing, they must have covering of thin cotton cloth, and the whole body and clothing should be wet by pouring the milk. You can see the picture of this in the New Back to Godhead magazine, and perhaps you saw the ceremony when it was held in New York. And then we get nice information here. Deities should be decorated with sufficient flowers, nice, gorgeous dresses and ornaments. So 3 things there: sufficient flowers, nice, gorgeous dresses, and ornaments. Beforehand, you should polish the bodies with a mixture of tamarind pulp and fuller's earth. So, sorry. Sorry, I get these coughing spells quite regularly. So, these were brass deities, the ones that are in Boston. And he mentioned tamarind pulp and fuller's earth. So that fuller's earth was pre-tilak time. It's what we used before we started getting tilak imported from India. You get it at a pharmacy. It's like a clear, a clean type of powder from earth. So then he said, so polish the bodies with the mixture of tamarind pulp and fuller's earth. Apply the pulp on the bodies and then rub it and polish nicely with tissue paper. So he's referring to Kleenex. So this will give a very good shine. Then bathe the deities with milk. It doesn't mention anything else. With milk, and dress very nicely with ornaments, and place them on the throne with flowers and candles, etc. If possible, the throne should be coated with silver sheets, and the canopy should be red velvet with gold embroidery work. Before the deities on the staircase, there may be some polished silver cups, a pitcher, etc. Pitcher, like, a pitcher, not picture. I think that deities already have helmets, crowns, and peacock feathers and hair to be dressed with. If not, make arrangements for this also. Just a comment here. You notice he mentions crowns and helmets. At this point in time, turbans were not part of things. That came quite some time later. And once when asked about wearing turbans, Prabhupada said it's all right. He says, but I prefer crowns. So something to keep in mind. I do not know, although he said if you're going to use turbans, they should be ornate. He used the word ornate. So continuing the letter to Satsvarup, I don't know how big the throne is, but if it's very big, then within the throne, there may be a raised seat to accommodate the deities. On the whole, everything should be very gorgeous, and then it will be successful. And then comes a very important instruction that is either not known or is overlooked today. Actually, although Radha and Krishna is worshipped in Vrindavan, which is like a simple village, but we worship Lakshmi Narayan, and the worship is accepted by Radha Krishna deity. Actually, in our present status, we cannot worship Radha Krishna, but as all the Vishnu Murtis are situated in Krishna, therefore our Radha Krishna worship is transferred to Vishnu, Lord Narayan. Vishnu worship is the regulated devotional principles, and Radha Krishna worship is spontaneous service of eternal feelings. Therefore, as Lakshmi Narayan is the deity of great opulence, similarly, our Radha Krishna Murtis also should be worshipped with great pomp and dignity. Krishna will give you the proper intelligence to do this very nicely. So far the prayers you may chant Hare Krishna, Govinda Jaya Jaya, and Govindam Adi Purusham. So I always appreciate Prabhupada's simplicity and his consistency. And I think consistency is a very important part of deity service. Not that one day we do something and, then the next day something else. I mean, we can do that as long as we're consistent with the basic model of the deity worship. So say like you have your basic outline, but you can add to it on occasion for special festivals and programs and observances. But we have to maintain a consistent level of seva. It was something Prabhupada was always clear on, no matter what would come up.
Thank you very much, Malati. And I'm just wondering, would anyone like to ask Malati any specific questions in relation to her experience in deity worship or in relation to her experience with Srila Prabhupada? Any thoughts at all? I have one question.
Hare Krishna.
About simplicity. Because we see that nowadays, because one of the points you mentioned several times was how Prabhupada introduced very simple deity worship. Yet we see in some places how the worship has become quite complicated. Yeah. Do you think Prabhupada would be okay with this increased complexity, or you think he would prefer simplicity?
Both. He'd be okay if it was being managed consistently. Just like we just heard from Krishna Goswami about sounds terrible to say, overworked pujaris, but there's an issue nowadays in many areas where we don't have the number of people required. For example, for Radha Krishna deity worship, he said we require no less than 10 brahmanas. And sometimes the situation is there may only be one brahmana to do everything. Or if the one brahmana can't do everything, then non-Brahmins and even uninitiated persons get called in. And this is not pleasing. I'm saying this confidently because, I hear the arguments, but these people are more devotional than these so-called Brahmins. But, Prabhupada gave an instruction specifically and multiple times regarding Brahmins serving the deities and in the kitchen. So if we think that can be adjusted or changed, we can do it. But if we don't please the preceptor, Srila Prabhupada, then I don't see how we're also pleasing the deity. At the same time, I understand if you're in a situation and it means that there isn't going to be an offering or there isn't going to be a dressing, then you may probably have to make a compromise. But it seems to me that if things weren't so difficult, you might not be in a situation where you have to compromise. Well, if you can remain consistent and keep up, fine. But if it becomes a liability in terms of daily maintenance, then it seems that complicated deity worship is not really achieving a pleasing goal, a pleasing standard to the deity. Prabhupada had sent Jamuna to go and observe Radharaman deity worship. This was allowed, and she was by the Sevites there, by the Goswamis. And each day she would go back and report what she observed. So this went on for a few days, and then one day she came back, and she'd been introduced to mudras, and that probably just stopped right there. He said, "Okay, that's enough," meaning you didn't need to go back anymore. And he stopped her at that point in time, at any rate, from the mudra performance. So to me, that shows simplicity, again, as being an important feature in our deity seva. At the same time, we're talking about his words, gorgeous, opulent worship. But the gorgeous, opulent worship seems to be nicely dressing, the nice flowers. He mentions flowers in the letter to Satsvarup. There's another letter to Madhavisa, it was specific to Jagannath Rath Yatra, but he specifically said the temple president had to give more money for flowers. So flowers are always a very integral part of the deity worship. And in that connection, no fake flowers. Letter to Himavati telling that, no, we cannot use these plastic flowers. So, plastic can be so many other things nowadays. Fake, think fake. We don't use fake flowers on the altar or offering to the deity. In fact, he said if there was a problem for getting flowers, then okay, you could offer leaves. Now, of course, in many places during the winter when flowers are really scarce or just prohibitively expensive, there's also not leaves because it's the cold season and the trees have shed their leaves. So therefore, devotees have to be mindful, and the temple needs, if they've taken on the service of deity worship, it means that they have to include sufficient funds to serve those deities in all seasons. When Radha Gokul and Nanda were installed at the manor, Srila Prabhupada personally told me that I should maintain these deities. I should see their maintenance. And I should establish a bank account where only they would be served and that nobody else would have access to that bank account, because he understood what would happen is that if there was financial trouble on one side of the temple side, they would raid the deity account. So he said no one should have access to that account. So he was very concerned for the deity's maintenance and ongoing maintenance. And again, the consistency, punctuality, cleanliness, these were the standards you know, that were always put forward by Srila Prabhupada.
Very good. Thank you. Okay, if there's no other questions, I'd just like to again thank Malati for taking the time to attend and overcoming her technical issues there in New Vrindavan. Very kind of you to persist with that. And I personally found it really beneficial, and I'm hoping all the other devotees also found it beneficial.